Good evening and welcome to the Star Chamber Show live podcast, episode number 434. And a big shout out to the band Far Cry for that awesome intro music that we so love. Thank you to Pete Fry, their fearless leader and fretboard wizard. And tonight is going to be an amazing show. We've been on quite a run lately. And in a couple of minutes, I will be joined by my co host, the one, the only, the loquacious, the vivacious Holly Phillippe. Yes, and it's good to have her back for a full week now in Lexington, Kentucky. So, yes, she will not be broadcasting from Indiana this week, and definitely great to have her home and getting back to her old feisty, loud self. You all be glad to hear that, and many folk we can all vouch for that here. I promise. And it looks like Carol Pre-Flattish is in the chat room to kick things off. The chat room is open, of course. If you are listening to the show, definitely log in via the Podbean app so you can access the chat room, get some comments and questions in there. We always take them every week on the show, so it's a great feature. Podbean, we love it. And of course, after listening to the live show, you can always catch the show again the next day on a lot of different platforms, ranging from YouTube to iHeartRadio to Amazon to Spotify, just all of them. So yes, quite a few, quite a few. And so it looks like Holly has just logged in, folks. Yes, Holly is in the building.
I am
Holly, how
in
are you
the
doing?
house. Hello, hello.
The fireball herself is ready to go. And I'm doing double duty tonight. I just got done,
Yeah,
Holly, doing the Vamp Chat with Dan and Ava podcast,
yeah.
which I was a guest. So I was a guest an hour ago on their show, and now here I am hosting this one. So, yes, I'm wearing both
You got
hats of
to.
the podcast world tonight.
You had
So
long enough to eat dinner, watch some
I
wrestling
did.
with the grandkids, and
I
get
did.
back on.
Yeah, time to watch a couple of matches of wrestling. Have some great meatloaf, I might say so myself. Holly, yeah, yeah, Holly definitely knocked it out of the park on that one, and had a great chat with Dan and Eva. We as I told people, I do qualify for a show about vampires. A lot of people might
You
not
do.
know that, but I do have a significant vampire presence in some of my Raiden Valkyrie tales, and
He
and
does.
they do weave to a few of them do weave together, even though a couple of them are standalones, and one is an unreleased duology coming up, but one that features them prominently was featured tonight, Prowling the Darkness. I got to talk about that. That was a lot of
And he
fun.
does that because I'm a closet vampire. Well, I'm not really
Yes.
closet. I think everybody. I'm a vampire. So
Yes, and you
yes,
got to listen tonight, which is great. I got to hear that because I know that you're very proud of me for some of my views on vampires, and I gave some good answers. I hope on a few of those
you do.
according to Holly's standards. Because I was asked quite a few questions about vampires. I even got to mention the great Brian Lumley Necroscope series, and I also love the fact that Dan Klefstad and Ava Vertris featured the original Salem's Lot, which I think is better
Yes,
than the reboot.
it
Not saying the
is.
reboot's bad. Holly and I saw the reboot,
Huh.
and we really did like it a lot. Not
Yeah.
trying to denigrate it, but the
Uh,
original still the harder hitting one by far. Love that one. Still creeps me out to this day. That is such a good one. And yeah, good to see Dan. I think he gave it 15 drops of blood. I think was the final score that
oh,
Dan
they're
gave
in
it.
here.
They are in
Hello,
here.
hello,
Yes,
Fam
Bam Chat
Chat.
with Dan and Ava is here in the house, and yeah, definitely, yeah, catch that show. They should be posting the streamable, downloadable version soon, and I will be sharing that link everywhere. And of course, definitely follow that show if you like vampires and all things vampires. They mentioned Night Flyer. I think Dan mentioned the Stephen King's short story Night Flyer at the end of that, which they did make a movie version of. I love that one. That's a really creepy one as well. Hope they cover that on a future show. And I hope, Polly, you got a kick when I got to talk about Jerry Dandridge, the Chris Sarandon character from the original Fright Night, because
Yeah.
he's always I've always had a soft spot in my heart for him. He's a such a fun vampire. Because they asked me, who's your favorite vampire? And I answered it in two parts, so I had to be difficult. My favorite vampires, plural, are from the world of Brian Lumley's Necroscope series. I always try to spotlight those great books whenever I can. And then my favorite vampire, singular, was Jerry Dandridge. So That was a
Uh,
lot of fun. That
well,
was a lot of
mine's
fun.
my beloved Lestat, and anybody that
Yeah.
knows me knows it's Lestat. And
Yes,
then
I
I
know.
would have to say, and you'll know this too, Steve. I would have to jump then, and my favorite female vampire would have to be Celine from
Well,
the
of course.
Underworld.
Of course. Yeah, well, I knew that was coming. Yeah, and that was good because I as I explained to there, I come from more of the shape shifting lycanthropic world, and of course, I talked a little bit about were lions too, which is the lesser known subset of the shapeshifters, but no less awesome. And I cannot either confirm nor deny that you may be seeing some stuff on that theme coming up in some of my work. So, but yes, it's some good stuff tonight, and yeah, we are talking, some good movies hitting the 1980s. I saw Sandy Lender made a comment on Twitter just right after the show. She was like, "I miss the 80s." Yes, I do too. Such a
Yes,
golden time. Yes,
I did for y'all too.
Salem's Lot came out right on the cusp of the 80s.
Yeah,
But yeah, my favorite vampire comes from a true 80s classic, Fright Night, the original. Yeah, don't bother with the reboot. Don't get me started on reboots. Just annoys the whole thing annoys me. But yeah, the original is just so good, so good.
and
And
that's
but yeah, Dan and Ava are just such awesome hosts. And again, if you like vampires, check out that podcast. And it's also on the same platform that we're on, Podbean. So yeah, great show. And yeah, the chat room is getting active. Looks like Sandy Lander has come in. Looks like D.L. Hearn. I mentioned that
Carol Free
Vamp Chat
Flags.
with Dan and Eva is there. Yeah, I mentioned that Carol's in here, which is awesome. She is just on a roll writing wise from looking at some of the posts she has been putting up lately. Of course, this month, yeah, pick up some great books from her Nathan Perry mystery series. Great for Halloween. She's got some great ones for Halloween: Murder, Mystic Hollow, Witch Hunt. All
What's
those
that?
great stuff for the Halloween season. And but yeah, we of course affiliate with the Imaginarium convention. So yeah, we want to keep you up to date on all things Imaginarium. And we have a bit of news, yeah, to share with you. We had a new spotlighted guest, some new panelists, and we had not one, not two, but three new individual patrons, and they all have they're all tied together in a way, and I'll explain in a moment.
Sure.
But for the panelists that have come aboard since we met with you last time, we have David Mattingly, who guy's just a genius, and I mean, literally the definition of genius. I mean, yeah, he's been everything from a engineer to a scientist and graphic designer, publisher. I mean, he's just does. I mean, it's amazing. Game designer, cosplayer, editor, just amazing guy. And he's coming back as a panelist, and also Randy Perrin, author, editor, publisher, super good writer, super good writer. She's just amazing, and she'll be coming back as a panelist. Also, I believe joining us for the first time is H.L. Hines. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is her first time as a panelist with us. That's author, editor, journalist H.L. Hines. And she'll also be an exhibitor in our expo. And Elisa Childress will also be coming back as a panelist. And she is an author, a great, very talented author, I might add. And then we also added author, editor, podcaster, publisher, and artist Paige Zaplendam, which I'm very happy about because that's another Z name. We have Alex Zank, we have Paige Zaplendam, and me, so I'm not alone at the Z end of the spectrum. It is absolutely great to have other Z's down there. And then we also have publisher and graphic designer Dan Aveland, who is of Word Weaver Pro. Great software package for writers. Highly recommend it. Really good stuff. Yeah, he's been exhibitor with us a couple years now, and will also be in the expo as well. But yeah, check out Word Weaver Pro. It's a great software package for helping writers keep organized on their projects. And then finally, our spotlighted guest announcement today, one near and dear to us, USA Today bestselling award-winning author Chastity Bolin. Yeah, and she is amazing when it comes for Georgian Regency romance. I mean, she is just awesome. She's won the 2019 Romance Through the Ages Award for Georgian Regency romance. 2020 Roan Award winner, 2021 Roan Award winner, 2021 Raven Award winner, and won the 2021 Imagine Award for Best Romance Novel. That's not enough. She's also in our inductee class, our 2025 inductee class for the Imagination Hall of Fame. Yeah, she is just awesome. And I have to say, a reason alone to come to Imaginarium. I mean, she she sells a ton of books. I mean, she has sales figures off the charts, and she's not afraid to share that knowledge in her workshop. She gives a lot of really, stuff you can't find everywhere, that you can't just Google or look up online or research easily. She gives a lot of really good insights in her workshops
And
on selling and
she's
marketing.
very encouraging, and
Yep, very
she
encouraging.
she's coming from years of
Hmm.
experience, and she's been there, done it, seen it. Can tell you tips, tricks, and what not to do.
Yeah, yeah, amazing,
Save you a
amazing
lot of
person.
grief.
Yep, and look forward to having her inducted in our Hall of Fame. And then also, this is our final announcement of updates, but we have three new Imaginarium individual patrons, and they are From the Ground Up Books, the John B. Tincher and James L. Calvert Independent Literary Foundation, and the Pen Crafters Writing Mentorship Program. All three are now individual patrons with us, and you can see that all of them are tied together with the amazing Lynn Tincher, who owns From the Ground Up Books, and she's the founder of the foundation and also founded the writing mentorship program. Definitely, doing great things, very proactive and supporting the writing community, and just a wonderful part of the Imaginarium family, and we appreciate these patron spots. Helps us a lot, and I say that on a weekly basis, but it can't be said enough. Yeah, the sponsorships, whether they're one of the main ones or whether they're an individual patron one, they really help us with being able to get more guests, do more things, and get more stuff out. For instance, we just got our first wave of postcards and bookmarks mailed out to a lot of people that are helping us distribute those on the ground in various places around the country, and those were sent out yesterday. So if you did get back to us and got us your address, be expecting those. So some people got them today already. They're just after a day, so yeah, they should be there by the end of the
No.
week. And thank you again for being willing to help us spread the word. We didn't get these cards out until the early part of 2024 for 2024's event, so we're way ahead on that. And when we get those individual patron spots and stuff, it does help us get more cards and more things like this. So yeah, those help a lot, folks. So please do check that out. And we should have announcements soon for awards banquet dinner tickets and for the Imagine Award nominations to open up. So be on the lookout for that soon. So
All
any
right, who brings us tonight's show? We've got a great guest getting ready to come on.
Yes, we sure do. And so I'm going to give you a real quick spotlight of tonight's, the fine folks that brought us tonight's show, and that'd be Sandy Lander, the genre blender, and then also those fine folks at Per Bastet Publications. And then we will bring our guest aboard. Let's give you a little bit from Sandy and her outstanding book, Silver Bells, a perfect read for the holiday of Halloween. And not just Halloween, but for the whole Christmas season. So give this one a listen.
What happens if you schedule a Krampus movie on the Hallmark Channel? You get Silver Bells from Sandy Lender. The reviews are coming in for this new holiday horror, and readers are loving the mature female lead and the spooky Christmas setting. BestThrillers.com gave Silver Bells a highly recommended rating, saying, through striking visuals, Reindeer Creek reads like a mashup of Washington Irving's haunted forests in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, the greed-induced decay of Pottersville in It's a Wonderful Life, and the glitzy electric spectacle of The Great Christmas Light Fight. Grab your copy of Silver Bells by Sandy Lender today.
And thank you very much, Sandy, for all your support, and definitely encourage you all to pick up a copy of that book. It is a very, very good one. So now a little bit about Per Bastet. Per Bastet Publications is a small press based in the Louisville metro area, specializing in speculative fiction and other outside-the-box books. With 40 titles in print and ebook formats and a handful of audiobooks, Per Bastet offers a little bit of everything. Check out Frenemies in Space, Marian Allen's new science fiction short story collection featuring return character Smartmouth Connie Phelan, or try Michael Dabney's latest David Blaze mystery, A Deadly Game, a prequel set in 1984 Philly. You can find these titles and more at perbastetpublications.com, at Amazon, or you can find the press in person at Kentucky and Indiana book fairs and conventions. per Bastet Publications, where timeless tales unfold. Salute to Teely Harris, Marion Allen, and Sarah Marion, the literary triumvirate, as I refer to them. And now we are actually on time, Holly. We're not even behind time right now, so we're doing good. So we are gonna roll right into our introduction of tonight's guests. So yes, I need to get our soundboard going fully so we can get some nice drum rolls. But our guest tonight has an amazing background in the mutual fund industry, one that has been over 25 years plus in the making, primarily at Vanguard. And his career product management has continued at various companies, and also is a sought after public speaker who inspires audiences with themes of resilience, recovery, and hope, drawing on his own extensive experience and personal insights. He is an author with a book called Suburban Bigamy, a true account of his own life that chronicles the painful story of two families built on one lie, forever linked through betrayal, infidelity, and bigamy. And so tonight, for the very first time, my honor and pleasure to bring onto the Star Chamber show for the first time, hopefully the first of many, Michael S. Zimmerman. And Michael,
Hello,
your
Michael.
Hey
your
guys,
mic should be on.
thank you very
There
much for
you are.
having me.
Yes, and we might actually be related, because it's a little known fact that
There you go.
you saw my last name is Zimmer, but before my family in the early 1900s crossed the Atlantic, the
Mhm.
original surname was Zimmerman, and
How
they
about that?
truncated it when they came here to make life a little easier for themselves on the,
Because they were
not being
Jews, you know.
harassed quite as much when they got over here in America. So so I originally, yes, I have a Zimmerman connection, and so yeah, who knows, might be related. So
There you go. Long lost.
yeah,
Right? More
so that's,
bringing more Z's to the
yes,
table, right?
more Z's
Yes.
to the table, and it's great. And so yeah, so tonight, technically, yeah, two Zimmermans are speaking. So this is awesome, and really we're looking forward to having you on the show. Yeah, since Holly told me about your book and the topic, and I know it's a bit of a heavy topic, which we will get into. Describe the we'll get into the subject of the book, because I think that'll open things up, because we want to work to your message of resilience and hope. And so, yeah, get into the book a little bit, and tell us a little overview about this book and how it, definitely personally relates to you.
Absolutely. And thanks again. So, um, my family, my mother and I uncovered my father's double life. About a decade ago, we discovered that he had, for over 40 years, truly lived a double life with an entire second family. And the unique feature or detail about this story was that that other family lived much of their lives 6.5 miles away from us. And neither family knew about one another. So if you think about how close in proximity that is. But it occurred during an era in the 70s and 80s, before the internet, when we were
Yeah.
very siloed in our communities. And my father was able to get away with it. As you can imagine, uncovering that type of detail is earth-shattering and shocking, and it caused you to think about everything in your life. I found out when I was 42, so everything I had
Oh,
experienced
wow.
with my father, it was a lie. It changed the projection or the perspective I had on my life up to that point. So it was a shocking revelation.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, 42. Yeah, I didn't realize it. That's when you
No, I thought
discovered.
I didn't realize you were 42 when you found out. I thought, you were younger. So what I mean, what tipped it off? What made your mother think, there's something weird going on here?
So it's interesting. My father was in the hospital for elective heart valve replacement surgery. He didn't
Okay.
tell us that. My mother thought he was on a fishing trip with business colleagues, and
Oh,
at that juncture, the family was based in the Chicago area, and my father was still working. And my parents also had a house in Arizona where my mother spent a lot of time. So they were often physically separated by distance, but they spoke every day. And she was out in Arizona and he was in Chicago, and supposedly on a fishing trip with colleagues. And he called her and he said, "Hey, I got to let you know I'm in the hospital and I had a mild stroke. I'm going to be okay. And he laid this story on her, and she hung up the phone and called me and said, I just talked to your father, and this is the story he told me, but it just doesn't add up because he was 6 hours away from Chicago fishing. How does he end up back in Chicago at Northwestern Memorial Hospital if he had a stroke?
Ah.
So it was a little concerning. The story didn't make sense, and my mother was wondering if maybe the stroke had affected him, and that's why the story wasn't adding up.
Oh,
So
okay.
she decided to call the hospital, and she gets a nurse on the phone and identifies herself as Norm Zimmerman's wife.
Right.
And the nurse says, "Oh, well, I just met you a little while ago."
Oh.
And there was this awkward pause because, of course, my mother's calling from Arizona. And they both hung up the phone, and my mom called me and said, "Hey, this is what just happened when I called the hospital." And I said, "Well, I'll go ahead and call the hospital." And I jumped on the phone, and I'm on the East Coast near Philadelphia. And so I called the hospital. And again, I got a nurse on the phone who was very transparent and willing to share details. And I just said, "Hey, I'm on the East Coast. I'm checking on my dad. Can you let me know how he's doing?" And she said, "Oh, yeah, he came in for elective heart valve replacement surgery the other day, and he had a mild
Uh,
stroke during the procedure. He's going to be okay, but he'll be here for rehab on one of his legs for the next month or so." And I said, "Okay, great." I said, since I'm out here on the East Coast, I'm worried about making sure someone's checking on my dad." And she said, "Oh, yeah, your mom and your sister and her baby were here today." And I said, "Oh, that's great." I said, "That's not my family, but I'm glad someone's checking on." And I hung up the phone and called my mom, and I said, "Hey, this is what I just learned. I think we've got some work to do because something's going on." And we jumped on the internet and started doing people searches. And we would search for our family, and we would all come up together, my mom, my brother, my father, and I, with our various different addresses. And there was this other name of this other woman who had the same last name as us, who was about the same age as my mother. And we were wondering if maybe this is some cousin of my father's we didn't know about. So
right.
we started searching on my father's name. And the names that would come up associated with him were this other woman, us, our family, and then these two other adults who were about the same age as my brother and I, a male and a female. And so it started to paint the picture that there was this other unit, this other family unit. And they kept coming up in a nearby suburb, different school districts, so there was no overlap, but not that
Right.
far away. And so it started to paint a picture. We hired a private detective, and we got on the phone and explained everything to him. And we agreed to get back together on the phone in about a week and a half. And we got back on the phone, and he had pulled in some details. We had continued to pull details of our own from our internet searches. And at that point, we had a full picture that there was a whole other family unit. We had the addresses of the homes that they had owned. Um, and there was enough information that my mother felt confident to move forward filing for divorce. And she wanted
Wow.
to file for divorce immediately and have him served while he was still at the hospital. And so that all
Well.
occurred in the first 3-4 weeks,
Whoa.
right?
Wha-
Mm-mm.
Yeah, that wow. I mean, yeah, definitely you have
Yeah,
events in
that's
your
a
life that
that's
are
I mean, that's a shock. That's
yeah,
that's and
that's a
how long had they been married at that point?
So this was 2013, and my parents were married in 1967, right? So
Mm.
47 years. And
Mm.
um, the details, the timeline that we were seeing for this other family almost mirrored our timeline. In fact, my half brother is 9 months older than me, so he was actually born before I was. My father was legally married to my mother in the state of Illinois in
Oh,
1967, and he had a second family unit with this other woman who took his name. The other children have the same last name as us. and for all intents and purposes, the children, they felt that their father was the only family they had,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
So it's interesting because it evoked a ton of questions, right? You're like, how did he
Yeah,
do this,
that's
right?
it. Oh, and the
How?
word.
Because we knew where he was most of the time. He
Right.
owned a car dealership. I worked for him at times. We could always call the dealership and get him on the phone most of the time. The dealership was open 6 days a week, and he was there 6 days a week. So we're like, gosh, how does he do this? How did he pull this off? So there was so many questions, and of course, spending hours on the phone with my mother talking about this, we start to piece together all these individual red flag moments from her history with my father.
That you didn't even think about then,
Right.
you know. Yeah.
Individually, they weren't always enough to raise suspicion, those
Right.
individual moments. But now looking back, you had a full picture. And so, ton of questions. And so, fast forward, we have him served. And I got the first call. My father called me and he said, "Hey, it's Dad." He said, "Did you know your mom was filing for divorce?" And I said, I did. And he said, "Well, what's going on?" And I said, "Well,
Well,
Dad, we found out you had a secret double life with another family." And he said, "Oh," he said, "I better call your mother."
oh, he didn't deny it then.
So about an hour and a half later, my mother calls me and she says, "I just got off the phone with your father, and he admitted that there's going to be revelations, and he really had two questions. Here are actually two statements. One was to my mother, 'How much money do you want?' And her response was, 'I don't know, because I don't know how much money you have.' And his other statement was, 'I guess this ends my relationship with the boys,' meaning my brother and I.
Oh my God.
And my mother said, 'Well, that's really going to be up to you and how you handle
Right.
this, and up to the
Right.
boys and what they want to do.'
Right. Because we were
And
adult
so,
men. So.
right? I mean, his statement was very telling, and we look back on it all, and of course, he's armed with a lot more information than we were.
Right.
He
Right.
knew who he was dealing with on the other side, the other family,
Uh huh.
and he knew what that meant.
Hmm.
But again, he was keeping all the details very tight to himself, and he was then entering this drawn out divorce process with my mother, where he was a car dealer, and before he owned a car dealership, he was an attorney, a divorce attorney. So he knew
Uh,
what he was doing, and
so
so
that's how he was able to fund this. Yeah. I couldn't
yeah,
imagine keeping two
he,
households.
he made a ton of more money than we ever knew, supporting
Right.
both these families. And so we had a ton of questions, and we were pressing him for a lot of information, and he would slowly let bits and pieces of information out without revealing too much about the other family, not giving us enough to go on, and certainly nothing to harm his negotiations with my mother for their divorce.
Right.
And that
Right.
that negotiation was really just about money. There was nothing else left to figure out at that point.
Right.
So it was about 6 months into the process that we had put enough information together to know this other family didn't know about us.
Hmm.
And it was based on conversations we had with my father, and he eventually was able to disclose enough that we knew they didn't know about us, and we felt they needed to know,
Agreed.
right?
Absolutely.
So it was
You
a
got
it was a perfect
you
time,
have two
right?
two half brothers that you suddenly
Yeah.
discovered. Yeah.
Yeah, half brother and half sister,
Or
and
half
There you
sister.
go.
Yeah. Sorry.
so
Yes. Yeah.
no, that's okay. And we felt like certainly there was a great opportunity to um, put pressure on my father by disclosing to them that we exist, and we also thought we could learn a lot more if we were able to engage with them.
Right. Piece the puzzles
And
together. Yeah.
right, and so I had crafted a letter, an anonymous letter, just stating that Norman and Ann Zimmerman had been married for 47 years, and they had two sons, Michael and Alan, who lived in the suburb of Winnetka. And we were able to find my half sister's address, on the internet, and she was in another suburb of Chicago. And with her family, she was married and has 4 kids, and sent this letter off. And I had actually overnighted it to a friend of mine in Chicago. It was already in the envelope addressed to her, and I just said to him, "Drop it in the mailbox so it's got a Chicago area post stamp," because
Nice,
I
nice.
didn't want any ties back to me, right?
Right, right,
And no return address or anything.
right.
And within a couple days, my mother got a phone call from my half sister. She found my mom's name on the internet, her phone number, called her. And they spoke for about an hour and a half. And then
Wow.
my mom my mom got in touch and said, "You're going to hear from your half sister." And sure enough, she called, and we chatted, and we both filled in a lot of blanks for each other. And I had the benefit of being 6, 7 months into the process at that point. I had reconciled a lot of the details, whereas she was days into learning about this and was still very much in shock and denial.
Oh man.
Well,
So as you can
yeah, I
imagine,
mean,
the
it would be.
conversations were
Yeah.
very different, right? But I did
Sure.
learn
Well,
a
yeah.
lot. I learned about, he was with us about 85, 90% of the time. And we learned that they thought he was still an attorney who traveled on business 5, 6
Uh-huh.
days a week,
Ah,
Oh,
okay. Okay.
okay.
That's
right?
making sense.
They didn't know about the car dealership.
Okay.
And so that accounted for his time with them, or why he wasn't with them, right? They thought he was on the road all the time. And for us, we knew he was at the car store 6 days a week. The store was closed on Sundays, but he often supposedly went to the store to do paperwork.
Hmm.
And he would disappear for like 12 hours on Sunday. Well, we came to find out Sunday was the day he spent with them. So
Oh,
imagine spending over 40 years of your life doing that juggling act.
that's what I said. He had to be an extremely clever man because trying to juggle this, it's hard enough to juggle one household, but two,
Right?
and have two sets of children also. I mean, was he involved in your all's lives? I mean, did he go to like, you know, I don't know if you were in band or school functions or what
Oh,
or
sure.
sports. I mean, did he attend? Was
He
he
was
present?
he was very involved. He coached our little league teams. He
Wow.
went
Um,
away on Boy Scout trips, Cub
oh
Scout
my
trips.
God.
He was very involved. We saw him every night, and he was around our lives, and he was very much involved. My mother was very involved in the community, and all the events socially that she had to attend to that were affiliated with her community commitments. He was engaging in those. All of our friends' parents knew my father. We traveled frequently on vacations as a family, and also my father traveled frequently with my mom on Ford Motor Company trips for the car dealers. They traveled around the world on a bunch of trips, and so that it was very much we were not only the legal family, but we were really the family. And this other family with this kept woman is really what she was. Um, they didn't realize it, at least the kids didn't, but that they were not getting him, not because of his career, but because of his commitments to another family.
Right. So how long was he married to this other woman? Not
So,
legally, but
not legally, right? So they, and there's a couple things he had never answered to, and one of them was flat out, when and how or where did you marry her? And
right.
he was very vague and evasive on answering that, because he didn't want to admit to bigamy.
Ah,
But
interesting.
it was November of 1970, Thanksgiving, when my mother was pregnant with me. My
Oh,
father went on a business trip to Las Vegas
ah,
and came home without his luggage. Says it was lost by the airline. And at the time, my mother didn't have any reason to doubt that or question it. She was pregnant with me and a young spouse in love with her husband. in retrospect now, we all look back on that and say, well, gosh, he took that other woman to Vegas and married her. And you think about 1970, everything was paper, hard copy. There was no digital world.
Right.
There was no way to keep track. If he was married in the state of Illinois, if he went out to Nevada and married this other woman, who would ever find out?
Right. Right.
Right? So she
Wow.
thought she was legally married to him. In fact, she wasn't.
Oh
Right.
man. Yeah.
But she
Mm.
also, there's some nuances to it because she knew she was a kept woman. She knew he wasn't fully available to her, and she accepted this life in which he was around 10% of the time.
Huh. But then the kids never
Yep.
realized that.
And obviously
The
he
kids didn't realize it, and it was interesting because when I had the conversation with my half sister, I came away from that conversation at the time feeling like I potentially had an ally and that we would speak again because there was a lot more information we would disclose to one another. That hour and
Right.
a half conversation couldn't cover everything.
No.
And within days, I get a phone call from my father. And in the background is the other woman screaming in tears, crying, yelling. And my father says, why did you reach out to your half sister? And I said, actually, Dad, she reached out to Mom and then she reached out to me. And he said, well, who contacted her? And I said, we didn't contact her. And he said, well, who sent the letter? And I said, Dad, honestly, Mom still has a lot of friends in the Chicago area who know about the situation. Mom
Yep.
wasn't hiding the fact that this happened. And I'm sure she has angry friends who any of them could have sent that letter to my half sister, alerting her to the presence of us.
Right.
And so he was mad that he said, you told her too much. Because, of
Yeah.
course, I disclosed all these things about our life with him.
Right.
And he said, you told her too much. And I said, well, what do you mean I told her too much? I said, we both exchanged information. We both had questions for each other. And I said, I'm certainly not going to lie for you.
No. No.
Right?
Mm-mm.
No.
So he was mad. And in the background, the one thing that stood out, and this, what I'm about to say, was the first clue to figure out that this woman knew she was a kept woman. She screamed in the background, I can't believe they told them. Meaning us, we told their children.
Kids.
So that was the first kind of chink in the armor that revealed that she wasn't completely in the woods herself. And so eventually my father, he would let little bits of information out. One of the things he said is, look, Mike, both women were lied to.
Right.
And so the other woman knew she was a kept woman and that he was married to someone else. She just didn't know any of the details about us or where we were or what the story was. And she accepted being taken care of and knowing that she and the kids were always financially taken care of. And he was there when he was there and he wasn't when he wasn't.
Huh.
And but so in me telling my half sister the truth that their father was actually legally married to my mother, it now casts doubt upon both of her parents. It's not just her father who's lied to her. Now it's her mother who's also lied to her whole life. And I would say that's why the other one was so mad. And she
Yeah. 'Cause
said, I can't believe they told them because I
yeah.
exposed her lie also.
Right. Right. I just can't imagine somebody being that desperate that would do what she did. I mean, keep that secret from her children. Live like that, knowing that he's got another family, I mean, it's just mind-boggling to me why somebody would let themselves be used like that. Because essentially, she was like the mistress,
Mm-hmm.
that was occasionally visited, and they wasn't number one; they're just on the side burner. And I just can't imagine someone degrading themselves to that level for that many years. We're talking decades.
Decades. Well, you think about what we're able to figure out is he met her. He was a young attorney at the time when he got involved with her, and she was a legal secretary. And it sounds like she wasn't his secretary, but she was friends with his secretary. So he ends up with this mistress on the side, this legal secretary, and she saw him as a way upward, right, financially.
Gotcha.
And so that's what the deal she made. And you know, I can we can think about it and be like, all right, he got his mistress pregnant while he was married to my mother, right?
Right.
But the interesting thing is he continued to have children with her. It wasn't
Right.
just my half brother.
Right.
He had another child who actually died as a toddler with this woman,
Oh
and then
no.
later on he had the child who's my half sister currently. And so he continued to have children with both my mother and this other woman. So that's
Yeah.
that's the even crazier angle to it is, okay, you got
It's
your mistress pregnant, go ahead and divorce my
yeah.
mom and go be with your mistress, right?
Wow.
But instead
So
he got
so
the
the
mistress pregnant, then my mother pregnant, and had children with both
and
women, and then had more children with both women,
yeah, again.
right?
Hmm. That's a hard
So
one to get. Go ahead,
go
Holly.
ahead. I was gonna say, do you and your other siblings, do you guys talk now, or what's the relationship like? I know you said that you and your mom was, fine, because obviously your mom was oblivious to any of this, but I mean, how are they with their mom knowing what they know now?
It, it's very interesting. Right after I got that phone call from my father with questioning why I told my half sister so many details, the walls went up. They circled the wagons. There was no longer any contact with the half siblings. And they tried to start to put walls up around my father as well. And so it was almost, and again, we'll never know all the stories that were told in that household when the shit hit the fan, but
Right.
we'll never know unless they want to come forward and tell us. But we can certainly speculate that my father, combination of lies about us to discredit us and our story, and he probably bought them off.
Hmm.
Oh,
And because eventually we got further down the road and we got into some legal matters, and I sued for undue influence and guardianship because we thought she was exerting undue influence on him when he was in
right.
failing health. So I challenged them in court, and we didn't get too far, but we did get far enough to get into his estate plan. And we saw that he had removed my brother and I and was leaving everything to that woman. And
Oh,
that was after my parents were divorced. So after the divorce, he turned around and redid his will, cutting my brother and I out. So he probably promised them money in exchange for their loyalty and no longer speaking to us.
oh
And
boy.
then because he was in failing health and
Right.
they were in local proximity to him in the Chicago area, and we
Hmm.
were not in the Chicago area, he needed someone to take care of him. So,
Money's a
prior to,
motivator.
right, prior to
Yeah.
his stroke during surgery, he was a free bird. He could come and go as he pleased. He was still winding down the car business that he had sold, and he was driving everywhere, could do whatever he wanted. After the stroke, he could no longer drive. He was homebound, wheelchair bound. So he was no longer a free bird. He couldn't do what he wanted, and he needed someone to help take care of him. And he put all his chips, pushed them across the table towards them, and said, "It's all yours, and I need someone to take care of me."
Yeah, because you exposed him for his bullshit. So he's like, well, and that's a shame. I mean, that is just disgusting, and it's mind-boggling to me. But that shows what kind of character they had, you know,
Hmm.
because
Oh,
here you are,
absolutely.
blood siblings had went through the same thing they're going through, thinking, well, that was their dad and their dad only, and growing up with that and everything, and so for them to be bought off, well,
Well,
karma, what goes around comes around.
Well, listening to Michael's story, I can't help but think that even then, I mean, there would be, I think, even reasons to be more angry at him on their from their side because he was as Michael described, he was spending 90% of his time with
With
Michael and his brother, and
right
he was
opposed to
coaching their
them.
league with them and involved and present in their life, which means that in that 10%, there's no way that he was anywhere near as present in their
No,
lives. And
no.
so you'd think there'd be a little more, resentment, I guess, on their end toward him. That's what surprises me about
But
that a
money,
little
You
bit.
it's
you would
money.
think
Yeah.
so. It's the
You know,
money, and I also think things got very adversarial between us and them, and they handled things very poorly. For instance, they made us out to be the bad guys. In reality, all four kids were equal victims,
Mhm.
yeah, you didn't
and
Oh,
do
absolutely.
anything. You didn't
right,
do nothing.
we didn't do
This was
anything, and
all him, one
it
hundred
was all
percent.
him. And
Yeah,
my mother had always said I would never deny those kids access to their father if the tables were turned. She said the
right,
relationship between the kids and their father is their own.
right,
And
Mm.
so this other woman, obviously, we represented the deal with the devil that she made, right? And so us coming forward and coming into their life really upset her. And so she couldn't accept us. And she wouldn't tolerate her children accepting us either. And I think part of the reason, you know, they grew up in this toxic environment, right, where their mother had made this awful deal, their father wasn't around, and their behavior after everything came out, I think, was really informed by their childhood and this bad upbringing that they had. And that's why they can't deal with this with a level head or objectivity. And I feel sorry for them. I really have a lot of empathy for them because of what they realize now they endured, and
Mhm.
they can't
right,
undo it. And he's gone now, so they can't. The one thing that they probably could have done was to engage with me and unwind all the details and then confront him while he was still alive. But they never did that.
right,
And I felt comfortable that while I was still in touch with my father, I spent a lot of time confronting him and questioning him and ironing out as much as I could for myself with him.
Mhm. Mhm.
He wouldn't answer all the questions, but I got a lot of the questions answered.
right.
Um, but it's unfortunate, and we don't have any relationship with the other family at all.
That's a
Mhm.
shame. That is a shame. So
Yeah.
when did you decide I'm going to write a book? I mean, had you written stuff before, or would you just decided I'm going to do this? Did you have like somebody guide you or help you,
Well,
or
it's interesting. It didn't start the way with a book in mind. It really started when we were unraveling all these details. There was so much information and all these things that spanned over 40 years. And every time we'd find out something new, I just started writing down everything to keep track of it, keep heads or tails of it. And I let some friends in on what was going on. And I tell them everything, and they'd say, "Gosh, this is a lifetime movie." And
that's what
excuse me,
one of our chat
we
room members said.
we kind of laugh about it, and I'd
Yeah,
just be like, "Yeah, you're right, it might be." And so what eventually happened is I started writing a lot of the details down, and then after the first couple years, I hadn't realized at first that it had really affected me emotionally. I was very involved in supporting my mother through the divorce process and
right,
still very much chasing after my father to figure things out. I'd flown into Chicago a couple times to see him when he went to a couple different rehab facilities to work on his leg, to get strong enough to have a hip replacement. And so I would fly in and secretly sneak in to these places unbeknownst to the other family and visit with him and talk with him. And my father and I were very close. I worked for him. We were super close. I was much closer to my father than my brother was, and we always had a great relationship. And I had no reason to ever doubt anything like this was going on, or that we didn't have his full love and attention all the time. So it was shocking, and it really upset me in the relationship I had with my father. because it was essentially, it's one thing if you have this great relationship with your parent, let's say, and they die suddenly. Well, this was so much more tragic because he was ripped away from you due to these crazy circumstances, but he was still alive and you were not
Right.
being allowed to access the relationship.
Right.
And so
Right.
we got a couple years into it and they really started walling him off, and they moved him around to different facilities to try and hide him. And eventually he came home after a hip replacement, and then he was cut off from the outside world. They turned off his cell phone. They canceled his cell phone.
Good
And he
grief.
was prevented from outside contact, and we couldn't contact him. So the reality set in, and I went through this deep depression, and it really unraveled all aspects of my personal life for a couple of years because I was just kind of drifting sideways. Nothing
Well,
was
yeah.
getting resolved with my father, but he was still alive. And so I started to write. It was really became a cathartic thing, a healing process to start
Right.
to put it all together and piece the story together and talk about the journey and what was happening. And I got into it, and then it was around 2017 or 18, and the story just wasn't complete. It wasn't going anywhere, and it was kind of stopped. And I put it down for a couple of years. I walked away from writing and focusing on it. And then in May of 2020, during the pandemic, my mom calls me and she says, "Your father died." And I said, how do you know? Because we hadn't had contact with him in almost 5 years. And I said, "Well, how do you know?" And she said, "Oh, I got a letter from Social Security telling me that my payment's increasing
Ah,
because he died."
right. Because
I
he's
said,
legalized.
"Seriously?" So they didn't tell us he was sick, the other family.
Huh.
Oh.
So I jumped on the Lake County, Illinois website, ordered a death certificate, and because I could prove that I was family. And
Right.
2 days later, through FedEx, I've got this death certificate in my hands telling me cause of death. And he got COVID from the in-house medical aides who were coming into the house to clean him, bathe him, move him in and out of the wheelchair, all that stuff. They
Oh,
brought
the home
COVID
health
into their
aides.
household.
Oh my
Mhm.
God.
And so then he got shipped off to the hospital, Lake Forest Hospital near their house. And he spent the last 12 or 14 days, theoretically, I guess, alone, dying of COVID.
Wow.
And we had no knowledge of it, any of it. And they didn't have the decency to let us know.
Even let you know.
Let us know.
Unreal.
So
Wow.
it was at that juncture where I felt like, all right, the story's done. My father had died. 6 months prior to that, I had become a father to a son, and that had just overwhelmed me with joy and really turned my life in a new direction. And I felt like I had the whole story at that point. And so then I started up again in 2020 and 21 and 2, really hammering it out and working on it and finishing it. And I hired an editor to work with me on fixing it because I was so in the weeds with so many of the details.
Hmm.
I needed someone to help me bring it up to the right level.
Right.
And so I felt like I was like, I'm doing this. This is going to happen. And the editors that I worked with also run a small publishing company, and we decided to go for it. So, um, it's been wonderful. It's been a lot of fun. You know, the healing process was great, and coming through the other side of it, and really having worked through all the trauma. And getting to a good place where I can be comfortable talking about it.
Right.
And, my life is in a great place. It's really interesting because I think about, when my father was aging and before this happened, all of this happened, I always worried about his health and worried about losing him and what that would be like.
Right.
And I always kind of was dreading the day when I would lose him. And, then all this stuff happened and we lost him in a different kind of way than.
Well, essentially, you lost him twice.
Right? I did. And
Yeah.
I've had plenty of time to reconcile everything. And
Mhm.
really, getting married and becoming a father were the springboards to closing the chapter on that life
Mhm.
and moving forward. And something about becoming a father to a son was made it extra special for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was in such a good place that I don't look back at my father and I don't miss him. I don't miss the things that I thought I would miss about him before all this happened, when I thought about what it would be like to lose him. And to
Mm-hmm.
your point, I think losing him twice and going through all of this
Mm-hmm.
really numbed me to all of that.
Right.
But that's really how I got to where I was with the book. And it's been a really great, rewarding experience. People have been really supportive of the story and the experience I went through. Um, so it's been fascinating and a great learning experience and really rewarding.
Yeah, it sounds like the writing of the book brought you a high degree of catharsis, and definitely, definitely was helpful because we talk about it often on the show that writing is a great way to work through some pretty dark stuff, and this sounds like a really good example of that, and I definitely commend you, because that's not an easy story to tell by any
No,
means,
no.
and yeah, for sure, and to put it out there so publicly too. I mean, definitely not easy, for a lot of people to share that. And but at the same time, stories like this do need to be shared because there is a lot of stuff that happens in the world, and it helps other people know that they're not alone. No matter what,
Right.
something
Because
similar or
this
other
does happen. Yeah.
types of deceit, things like that, happen in other families, and so that's a quite a chronicle you have here, and
Well, thank
yeah.
you.
And it
It's
looks like,
it's
you got a
definitely
lot of good reviews too, from what I
well,
saw on your when I looked it up.
well, thank you. The response has been really strong, and people have been very supportive. And I think I try to be objective about when I think about this, because I obviously have a bias about the story and the work. But realistically, the story, it resonates with people because it's about family, relationships, um, family stuff, and when you live long enough, I think everybody experiences something, right? Some kind of
Oh,
trauma, whether it's with
oh yeah.
family
Mhm,
or friends or health. So all these elements to the book and the story are things that people can relate to.
mhm,
And I know I'm not the first one to have this type of story. There's been instances of double families before. I don't know how many of them occurred this close in proximity to one another in the same suburbs, quite like this, but or lasted this long in secrecy in over 4 decades like that.
mhm,
But I think people can relate to a lot of the different elements of the story. And in the book, I go into a lot of detail around the relationship between my father and I, and our love of baseball and the Chicago Cubs.
mhm,
And I spent a lot of time in the book talking about our relationship and how much we love the Cubs. And,
mhm.
we'd always talked about if they made it to the World Series, we'd go together. And of course, he was still alive when 2016 happened, but we were no
Mhm.
longer in touch. And I went to that World
Oh man.
Series in Chicago and in Cleveland. And so it was bittersweet for me, that experience, going to the World Series, knowing that a big part of that for me was thinking about my dad, too. Um, so there's a
Oh,
lot of
definitely.
elements to it that people can relate to. And so I think that's part of it. And I think, there's a scandal here too, right? What he did was so scandalous, and then there's the emotional fallout. So there's a lot of angles to it that people can relate to. I've had the opportunity to do several speaking engagements, and like I talked about earlier, the writing experience was very cathartic.
Mm.
I wasn't thinking that my story was so special in any way that it would help people. I never thought about it that way. Um, but once I started doing some speaking engagements, people would come up to me afterwards, or they'd mention something during Q&A, and they'd say, your vulnerability in sharing your story has helped me think about how I can confront my own situations. And
Absolutely.
I never even thought
Oh,
that I
Mhm.
was doing anything like that for somebody. It wasn't, and it just escaped my mind because my head wasn't there. I didn't think what I had was anything special or unique that would evoke that type of response from someone. And people have emailed me because they can access my email from my website, and that's at the end of the book. And I've gotten emails from people who've brought forward their own situations that have nuances that overlap with mine, and they've asked for advice, and they've asked like what they should do. And
Mhm.
I'm always happy to spend time interacting with people who come forward and make those comments or ask those questions. So there's just been this secondary rewarding aspect to it that I didn't anticipate.
Sure.
So that's been really nice.
Well,
That is.
yes.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And yeah, I just yeah, it's hard to wrap my head around it because even I was thinking when you're talking, I mean, he had a car dealership, and that's a very public sort of business, and
Yeah.
often tied to the person that owns it, and it's very, very public. Lots of advertising, lots of public face, and and like I'm just sitting here wondering, how many times, during that several decade period, did something come close to, where two
Tipping
and
the
two
kids
came
off.
together? Yeah.
Right?
And
Well,
how many
so
times did something like that happen maybe? Yeah.
we've always thought, how many near misses did he have? Right?
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, right. So
Mhm.
a couple things I can say on that. The car dealership, first of all, my grandfather owned it before my father, and it was
Mhm.
named after the location rather than being in the
Ah,
family name. So
okay.
that's how he
Yeah.
flew under the radar there, because
Yeah,
it was
okay.
Yeah.
tied to the town that was in the suburb rather
Uh-huh.
than
Mhm.
having the name. Because often they have the family name on the dealership,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
yeah.
it wasn't like the
Often.
Zimmerman,
Right.
car line.
Yeah.
Like
That's a
Zimmerman
distinctive name,
for
I mean,
right.
I know. I
So
know it's like being a Z, but yeah.
yeah,
But,
so
yeah.
he was able to fly under the radar there. Two interesting people came out of the woodwork about a year ago. In the suburb in which that other family lived, um, I had a publicist who was doing some PR work for me in the Chicago area, and she hit social media in their suburb pretty hard last summer, a year ago. And all of a sudden, I started getting a couple Facebook messages and emails from people who said I was their neighbor,
Mhm.
and they said, "Do you want to talk?" And I said, "Sure, let's jump on the phone." And the one guy was a little younger than myself, so he would have been a peer of my half siblings in the neighborhood, one of the kids in the neighborhood who lived across the street from them. So he had stories about what it was like being a child with being friends with the half siblings and the restrictions he remembers that were on those kids and what they were and weren't allowed to do in the neighborhood. So he felt like they were kept very close to the home, not allowed out very much,
Uh-huh.
never allowed to go into other neighbors' homes.
Ah,
And the speculation was that if they got into someone else's house, the parents might start asking questions
right.
about this weird circumstance. And the weird circumstance, of course, was what another neighbor told me was, we all thought something was up, but we just couldn't put our finger on it. We thought your dad was in the mob and she was the kept woman. And I said,
Oh
Oh,
my god.
why the mob? And he said, well, he drove Lincolns and he showed up in suits. And I chuckled and I said, well, he always wore a suit and he owned a Lincoln dealership.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it is
so
Chicago, right? So, they have to.
I
So
know.
they said he would show up in his Lincoln wearing a suit, and he'd show up like once a week, and he
Yeah.
wouldn't be there very long.
Kitty's
And
money
he
and go. That's what they
Jeez.
right, the one
Unbelievable.
neighbor
Wow.
Yeah,
said he lived next door for 9 years, and he said the only time he ever spoke to my dad was during the blizzard of '79. He asked my father to borrow the snowblower because he knew there was a snowblower in the garage, and my father let him use it. He said that's the
Mhm.
only time in 9 years they ever spoke to each other. He said anytime my father would pull in the
Jeez.
driveway, he'd get out of the car and go right in the door. He'd never look around or interact with anybody.
Uh-huh.
no,
And
I can
so,
understand.
right?
Yeah.
Wow.
No kidding.
So that was
That
interesting to hear stories that come out of the woodwork from people that knew them. And that was great for us because, aside from the family who we don't speak to,
Right.
we didn't know anybody else who knew them,
Mhm.
Right. You
could
didn't
tell
know,
us anything, right?
yeah, everything about, what was going on on the outside.
Right.
Yeah. So as little pieces of information come forward once in a while, it's great to learn about stuff like that.
So how old was your son when you wrote this book and this revelation? I mean, is he aware? I mean, I assume he's an adult now, but I mean, is he
No,
aware?
my son turns 5 in a month.
No,
Oh,
he's
he's
young. Yeah, younger.
little.
He's a
No, yeah,
little
Even
it,
guy.
better.
just a few years ago.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah, so he was born in the fall of 19.
Mhm.
And
okay.
so, obviously I'm an older first time dad, and it's been such a really great rewarding experience.
Well, yeah, you're
Um,
seeing it from the other side, and I'm sure it's making it even more mind-boggling to you how your dad done such a thing because you know the love you're feeling for your son, and it
yes,
it, it just
you're
has to
so
be.
right on the money.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it has to be mind blowing. I mean, I have 4 kids. I mean,
Mhm.
I can't imagine. And do you think will you ever tell him? I mean, obviously, you might find the book later on, or do you plan to tell him when he's older?
I do. There's a portion of the book that's where I talk about my son, and I write a letter to my son talking about the impact and influence he had on me. Like
Mhm.
becoming a father to him was such a
Right.
big part of the healing process for me. And so I write a letter to him in the book,
Oh,
and so I intend to when he's old enough explain everything to him and um, talk about it with him and make sure he knows everything. Um, so yeah, someday when he's old enough to understand everything.
Yeah,
wow.
that's I my dad had a difficult relationship with his father, and I think in many ways, it helped him, looking back on it, become the amazing dad that he was to me. I think I hear echoes of some of these things. The difficult trial you went through because of your own dad, I think, is going to
Yes.
reflect in how you approach being a father
Yeah.
yourself. I see a parallel somewhere there,
You want to
about,
do better,
it just
you know.
happens. Yeah, it just helps gird you to be an even better father, I think. And yeah, that is, I hope, all the best. Yeah, yeah, going
No,
forward
I
for
think
you.
you're
And
right. You've both touched on that, and the fact that you know, I I love being a father, and I often think about when I'm experiencing stuff with my son. I often think about what my father was or wasn't doing the same way with my brother and I,
Right.
and how his interests may or may not have been divided, or what he was thinking about, or how committed he was. And so I do think about those things, and those are, and I'm sure I always will to a certain degree. Um, I know I'm
Mhm,
much more involved and invested than my father was.
mhm,
And so that, of course, makes me think more about, geez, you know, how he skated by the way he did for so long, kind of doing the
mhm.
bare minimum,
Right.
and even less for the other family. So I do think about it a lot. Certainly when I'm experiencing certain things with my son, it comes across my mind, and maybe that'll fade as time goes on. But it's certainly been something I've thought about in the first almost 5 years of my son's life.
Nice. Now, I was wondering, one question. You don't have to, like I said, it may be a difficult question, but at some, as you said, you're older, but you're certainly not old, and you've got a lot of years ahead of you. At some point, if your half siblings become like prodigal half siblings, have a turn of conscience, and they choose to reach out to you in some manner, will you return that email or phone call, or are you, are you close? Is that door closed as far as
No,
they are
I'm
concerned?
open to it, and I say that because I still think there's a lot we could learn from each other.
Mhm,
Um, at the end of the book, so I should give you a little detail. I talked about the interaction with my half sister. She
mhm,
was very present and easy to access. She's on Facebook, social media. You can find her easily. My half brother, on the other hand, he was like a ghost. He had no digital footprint. You couldn't find him.
mhm,
And for the longest time, we wondered about him, and we knew a little bit about him from what my father told us. And when we were still interacting with him and we were trying to pull details out of him about this other family, he revealed a little bit about this half brother, and but we couldn't find him. We couldn't get a phone number. We couldn't reach him. And I was doing some research, and I came across my father was a fisherman, and he often fished up at Lake Geneva in southern Wisconsin. And so I was poking around on the internet, and I came across this Lake Geneva Fishing Club. And I went in, and there was a membership page, and it had the members listed there. And lo and behold, there's my half brother and a phone number. So I called him. And this was literally just in 2022, 21,
Wow.
22.
Mhm.
And the book wasn't done yet. And I called him. He answers the phone, and I identified myself as Michael Zimmerman. I'm your half brother. And he paused for a moment, and then he chuckled and said, I don't have a half brother. And he hung up.
Oh my God.
And so I'm thinking, what kind of delusion is he still living in? And I say that because when my parents got divorced, my brother and I did not fly into Chicago to go to to court that day. But
Mhm.
when my father showed up to court, he's in the wheelchair. That whole family went to court and showed up. They sat there
So
and
they were
listened
there.
to the truth and the fact that there was a legal proceeding dissolving a 47-year marriage
Mhm.
between my mother and their father.
Right.
And so he's either spiteful or he's in denial, right?
Mhm.
But again, it goes back to the idea that I'm not the bad guy. I'm not the enemy, right?
Right. Yeah.
So again, I think about whatever they experienced, whatever they didn't get in the form of parenting from my father and their mother, who obviously wasn't all right herself.
Mhm.
That informs how they act as adults, I think. And I
Mhm.
genuinely feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, yeah, if there was ever a genuine outreach, I would engage. I don't
Mhm.
lose sleep over the fact that we don't have a relationship, but I
Right.
certainly wouldn't do to them what they've done to us.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
So, for
Wow.
example, I don't know if they know about the book. I suspect they do because there was a fair amount of PR in the Chicago area.
Right.
Mhm.
I was on TV in Chicago on the WGN morning show last year for an interview on the show. I was a guest on the Whitney Reynolds show on PBS.
Oh
So there's
yeah.
been a fair
Yeah.
amount
Yeah.
of PR.
Mhm.
I suspect they may know about it, but I haven't heard from them.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You just never know what might happen down the line. Yeah. That's what I was curious about that though. But now, as far as your speaking engagements, what do you have any coming up? Because we definitely want to give you a chance to spotlight some if other people want to come see you.
No, I appreciate that. I don't have anything right now. I'm certainly open to doing more. It's interesting. I've had some, in the Chicago area where they've wanted me to come and speak to a large organization those same suburbs and kind of talk about the story.
Hmm.
And I've also, some other folks in Chicago suburbs, book clubs have reached out to me. I've gotten an email from a book club in the suburbs, and they said, "Hey," they didn't realize I didn't live in the Chicago area, and they said, "Hey, can you come to our book club?" And I said, "I'm happy to join you, but it's got to be over a Zoom." So I've done that, and that's always really interesting because, as you can imagine, there's a lot of questions.
Sure.
How did he do it, and all this stuff, and
Right.
um, so it's always fun and interesting to talk with the different audiences, and I'm open to doing more of that. I'm not actively pursuing it at the moment, but I have done a fair amount of those and several podcasts. And, the themes that come out are always talking about not only the story and the scandal, but the emotional impact that it had on me and this whole process of recovery and resilience. And, um, just the idea that before I went through this, I don't think I had a lot of empathy for what for trauma, for the things that people went through, because I hadn't really gone through anything quite traumatic like this before.
Right.
And I was just kind of selfishly living my life, and I didn't really have a sense for that it's
Mhm.
really something that probably affects almost every family to some degree, some type
Right.
of trauma. And so I come out of this with a much different perspective. What I went through was a very humbling experience and traumatic, and so I've learned a lot from it, and also learned a lot about that we're all going through something, and we're all carrying something, some burden, and we're challenged with something in all parts of our lives at times. And this idea that people struggle. I struggled for several years with this, and I just have much more empathy for the fact that we're all probably struggling with something at some point in our life.
Sure.
And it's probably hard to talk about it for a lot of people when they're going through something. And we probably don't always have the support system we need to get through it. And
Mhm.
having gotten through it and being in a much happier place, I look back on it now and see all the problems I had and the challenges I endured. And I didn't always have the right people around me supporting me.
Mhm.
Right.
Um, and so that was part of it. And then part of it was just figuring it out and going through the natural progression for me, which was the sense of loss with my father and overcoming that. And then, my mom had kept saying to my brother and I, "You guys cannot let this ruin your life." And she
Mhm.
said, "I've lived most of my life." But she said, "You guys have so much life ahead of you. You can't let this ruin
Absolutely.
your life." And I always think about that advice that she gave me. And, I just I didn't really, it didn't impact me in the moment because I was so deep in what I was going through. But I look back
Right.
on it now and I'm just like, wow, that was really good advice. And I think about that statement often. I'm like, this isn't going to
Mhm.
ruin my life. And I think I feel like if any of my speaking engagements happen to touch somebody and make them feel
Mhm.
better about confronting their own challenges, then that's wonderful. Um,
Mhm.
so
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, you definitely have come out in a much stronger way, and are in a good place as we speak. And is your brother, did he also come out to this sort of place also, as now, or is it still a bit of a challenge
Well,
for him?
yeah, so my brother wasn't as close with my father as I was, and I think that spoke to the fact that my brother didn't get enough from my father.
Mhm.
I was much more independent and just kind of went with it very easily, whereas my brother needed much more than he was getting from my dad. And that surfaced when he was a teenager. I mean, he had some problems with my father and trying to work through it. And we didn't know it at the time why that was happening. But we look
right.
back on it now and we're like, gosh, sure enough,
Makes
Alan
sense.
wasn't Alan wasn't getting enough from dad. And he
Right.
needed more and wasn't getting it. And so when this all happened, my brother was angry and hurt. Certainly felt the sense of betrayal that I did. Um, but he handled it very differently. So I got on planes and flew and confronted my dad face to face in those nursing homes and rehab facilities. I was very willing to engage with him repeatedly over the phone. I pursued this legally in court. Um, my brother didn't do any of that stuff. He had
Mhm.
conversations with my dad on the phone. The last time I saw my father was September of 15, and I had said to my brother, "Hey, I'm going to go see dad. We don't know what's going to happen. It may be the last time we get to see him. We don't know what his health is. Why don't you come with me and you can ask him anything you want?" And he said, "I'm not going. I'm just not. I'm not doing it." And I said, "Then write him a letter and I'll take it with." So he wrote this letter and with everything he had to say, and I took it along and I read it to my dad, and that was it. They never spoke again.
Mhm.
And
Wow.
I think granted, we all
Mhm.
process things differently, and we all,
Mhm.
how we deal with
Yes.
it is
Sure.
up to each individual. But I think I don't know. Maybe he's fine with not having confronted it,
Mhm.
um, or maybe someday it's going to bother him. I don't know. We don't really talk
Mhm.
about it like in those terms.
Mhm.
Right.
Um, so I don't know necessarily where he sits with it.
Gotcha.
Other than
Gotcha.
the fact that I know he's mad and he thinks what my dad did was horrible, which we all agree on that. And
Well, yes.
but he just wasn't willing to confront it the way I was.
Right.
Right.
Right. He's going to have to work through it in his own way. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe that's part of what worked best for me in my healing process, was confronting it
Yeah.
head on. And maybe
Right.
for my brother,
And
it's
then
better
laughing
to
about
avoid
it.
it.
Yes. Right.
Well, you still got each other, definitely,
No,
going forward. So
absolutely.
yeah. Absolutely, and yeah, I have to say that I was talking about the Zimmerman thing at the beginning, and with my life and you being a Zimmerman. If there is some thread of possibility that I'm somehow related to you, it would be an honor. I tell you,
Well, thank you.
yeah, I definitely there is a definite this is a definitely an inspiring story, and I want to thank you definitely for sharing it with us
Yes.
tonight. Yeah, it's not easy. It
Well, I
really isn't
appreciate
easy
it.
to share. Yeah, to
It's
share this kind
it's
of
been a
story.
pleasure talking with you guys.
Absolutely, and but before we wrap up, though, I do want to give you a chance to direct folks. Of course, I looked up your book on Amazon and the full availability there, obviously. But where do you want folks to either connect with you or find the book? What do you? We'd love, yeah, direct them wherever you want.
No, absolutely. So Amazon, you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
yeah, you're still there.
So Amazon's probably the place that most people pick up the book. It's available book retailer, Barnes and Noble, small bookstores can order it. But I think the vast majority of sales are through Amazon.
Okay.
Mhm.
And from a contact standpoint, if people want to reach out over email, it's mzimm71 at gmail.com. So I always take time to respond to anybody who reaches out. If they have questions or comments or whatever it may be.
Well, you are always welcome with us, and
Yes.
I hope that everything goes wonderfully for you going forward, and yeah, encourage you to continue sharing the story with your public speaking engagements, and who knows, maybe one day you'll write another book that
Yes.
chronicles the very positive aspects of being a father with your own son, and
Yes.
maybe you can do some kind of cool memoir or look at raising your own son
Yeah, I mean
at
that'd
some
be a
point.
great
Yeah,
topic, right?
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we need those kind of stories too. Yeah,
Yeah.
we need the positive sides as well told out there. But definitely, thank you for joining us. I'm gonna turn it over to Holly to wrap it up with you. But yeah, thank you very much. Yeah,
Thank you guys. It's been great.
Yes. Thank you, Michael, for sharing your story. And yeah, let everybody know the title again of your book so they can look you up on Amazon.
Thank you. It's Suburban Bigamy, 6 miles between truth and deceit. Just
Okay.
Suburban Bigamy will pull it up.
yep,
Sure it will. Sure it will.
If you
All
Google
right,
that,
Michael.
you can probably find some of the TV work that I've done, so you can
Oh,
watch
yeah.
those. If you're interested in other information around the story or the things that I've done. But yeah, Suburban Bigamy is the easiest way to access it.
sure am. Yeah, check that out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, keep in touch. And you ever, decide to write another memoir or anything to, like that, you can come back and tell us how you're doing and
Yeah,
what
anytime.
you've got going on anytime. Yeah, it's quite fascinating. Quite fascinating story.
Well, thank you both for having me. It's been great to be with you guys and discuss this.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, and you have a wonderful evening. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in and listening to Michael's story. And please check out his book, Suburban Bigotry. And you can find that on Amazon. And we want you to have a great rest of your evening. It's into the night now. And for the rest of the week, be creative. Join us next Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Another great guest, another great chat. Good night, all.